Today I'm going to talk about lubricants. As some of you are aware, I run a business. I do this for a living. This is my bread and butter. I have fun doing it. It's my thing. I, I get my brain picked often about which lubricants I use. Granted, you don't need to use all of these. These are just pretty much off-the-shelf stuff. Super Lube, those are my favorites. But what I'm going to go into is what makes a good lubricant. So first and foremost, your oils and your greases need to be protective. Now, if they're not going to protect against the elements, it doesn't have any business being in a reel. Because as you know, through the use and abuse when you're out on the water, you're going to need something that's going to withstand all that. And to begin with, what I'm going to do is go over various greases that I use. Now, remember to keep in mind that not all of this is required, but towards the end I'll get into a couple of them that would serve you well to use just as general purpose. So what we have here are, there's three different grades of grease. You can see there's NLGI 0, NLGI 1, and NLGI 2. Now, with those greases, what that means is the NLGI scale, that's the consistency of the grease. The lower the number, the lower the consistency. So your typical real grease is NLGI 2, which is about the consistency of peanut butter. Like I could take this off here. Let me see, I'm just going to take a little stick and you can see, like, as I move it around in there, how that holds up. It's pretty thick stuff. It's very protective, but at the same time, maybe you want your reel to feel a little bit different or perform a little differently, and you can move on to something like NLGI 1, which is the consistency of tomato paste. As you see, as I move it around, it moves a lot easier in that grease. And this NLGI 1 it's what I consider the universal grease for the way that I like reels to feel when I'm finished with them. It's going to give a nice mix of protection and performance. It's not going to need to be replaced as frequently as something lighter like NLGI 0, but this stuff here, you can see how it's much thinner. Now the NLGI 0, I much prefer to use it for things like clutch assemblies because it gives a super smooth feel to the clutch versus 1 or 2. Now where I don't use 0 is on the drag stack because I want something that's gonna stay put a little bit easier, because that's gonna be one of the areas where the reel's gonna see a lot of stress. And I usually like to use NLGI 1 because in a previous video I said it performs just as good in the cold as it does in the more pleasant weather, and that's the reason why I like to use that one. But something else I want to talk about is, what do you look for in a lubricant? Now, I've exchanged emails with a lot of different lubricant manufacturers, especially ones that deal with real grease and real oil. And a lot of them, when you ask them, hey, I want to see a technical data sheet, well, we don't have it. Or that's a trade secret. Well, to me, that's just telling me that they're simply repackaging a cheaper product and putting their label and maybe a little dye in it to make it look different. A good example of that, while it's not sold here, is going to be iOS grease, which is popular in Japan. And when you read about it on their website, it says it's mostly PTFE, which it's Super Lube, but iOS Factory sells their grease for it's about $16 at the current exchange rate for 10 grams of it. So this is 30 grams right here in one of these jars, so about an ounce. So you're paying for a tenth of an ounce, or a third of an ounce, 16 bucks for this kind of grease. So you could buy a 14-ounce tub of it for like 20, 25 bucks. This is where lubricant manufacturers, or I should say resellers, get you, is they don't want to disclose what's in their product. Well, fortunately, good manufacturers do disclose that information in their data sheets, and you can use that data that's in them to kind of get an idea of how your reel is going to feel and perform by the time you're finished servicing it. And That's become a thing of mine. Anytime I see some overhyped grease out there, I start emailing the manufacturers, and I'm like, hey, I want a data sheet on that. Oh no, there's a few of them that they'll happily give it to you, like Doothland, for instance. I asked them, and they're like, oh yeah, here you go. So I got their technical documentation, which to me says that they're very legitimate versus a lot of these Japanese manufacturers like Glitch Oil and ZPI or any of those that don't disclose any of that. Even Hedgehog Studio, their own alchemy oil, I asked them, I said, hey, I want to see a data sheet so I can get an idea how it's going to perform. And they told me outright, they said, well, we can't get that for you. And I said, why not? And they said, well, because it's a secret formula and we have somebody else make it and they wouldn't give it to us. And in my head, I'm going, well, why would you sell a product that you have no idea what's in it, and you're just telling people this is the best shit that anybody's ever made, and it's going to make my reel run circles around everything else? No, that's not how it works. The proof is in the data, and the proof is in the end experience. And you'll be much better served going through different routes and not real specific lubrication manufacturers. Doothland's a good one. Real X, as you can see here, they disclose that information. Cal's does with their purple and tan greases. A lot of them do, but when you get to the really hyped up stuff, that's where you tend to see no information available, and they'll outright refuse to give it to you. And like I said, it's most likely just some repackaged stuff that they're buying in big, massive quantities and putting it in a cute little jar with their logo on it and saying, this shit right here is carefully selected components. Now put it in your reel and that thing's going to really scream. Nope, don't work that way. So do your due diligence, research what lubrication or the lubricants that you're using, and you're going to have a much more pleasant experience instead of taking the word of somebody that doesn't even know what's in their product in the first place. And on that note, the reason why I have so many different lubricants is with my customers, I like to feel them out and, hey, what are you looking for? What kind of performance do you want? How do you want this thing to feel? And usually I can make something light and airy, I can make it smooth and connected, or I can make it like ultimate smooth, but there's going to be compromise somewhere. The smoother that a reel is going to feel, the more rotational inertia you're going to have in the handle, but at the same time it's going to be better protected than something that's just relying on thin lubricants to do parlor tricks like spin the handle and watch it spin for a minute. That stuff there doesn't have any semblance to actual fishing conditions. But typically for spool bearings, I'm going to use the lightest stuff I can get. Especially on my own stuff, customer reels, I'll usually go with TSI because it stays put a long time. BFS reels, I'll go with an ISO 10, sometimes ISO 22. Speaking of ISO 22, I stumbled maybe about a year ago, I stumbled on a technical data sheet of Shimano BFS oil, and that is ISO 22. Now, when I tried to ask them for that, they would not give me the specifications, but I did a little bit of digging around and I found it in the back corner of the internet. Where it was, I can't remember. It was just one of them late night things where you kind of get curious and start researching things, and I found it, didn't save it, shame on me, but that's what it is. ISO 22 is going to be pretty good for pretty much any spool bearing. You can always go a little bit thicker in the oil if you want something a little slower. Now, where that may play in favor of you is if you're not exactly the best caster. So if you're using something, if your spool's moving too fast, you can't control that backlash, you can go in and put a little bit thicker oil in there to slow them bearings down. Or if you want to free it up even more, you can do things like polish a few areas, but that's going to be for another video. I'm going to do it at some other point. But as you can see, you can take these different lubricants like this NLGI0. I also like to use that on worm gears and support bearings. Sometimes I'll go and use the 90 weight ISO 220, which is 90 weight gear oil. All depends on the feel that I'm looking for, and you can pack those little bearings by hand. It really doesn't take much grease. Now, bearing manufacturers often tell you to just fill the bearing to 1/3 to 1/2 the capacity or the volume of what the bearing is, where you just put a little bit on your finger and rub it in there and spin it around, and that should be enough for most cases. If not, you can use something like this, which is a small bearing packer. You just put a little bit of grease in there. Your bearing goes inside the bottom, right on this little guy, and put your grease in, push down, it's filled. But you can use all the different lubricants that you want to use to truly tailor the feel of what you're looking for. I tend more on the smooth side. That's just how I like my reels. You might like a light and airy side, but if you're using all low grade or low viscosity oils and really light grease and in the gearbox itself, just understand that it's going to have to be replenished on a more frequent basis because that stuff doesn't stay put as good as something that's going to be a little bit thicker. So you have to find that happy medium, which is going to be how frequently do you prefer to service versus how or not, either one or the other. But for somebody that's just starting out, what I would do is I would just use an NLGI1. You can get that, though that's pretty easy to find, and then an ISO 22 oil. That's going to cover pretty much everything. And you can even go, if you even go to a place like Lowe's or Home Depot or even a craft store, you can look into the different greases and oils that they have and pull up the spec sheets right on your phone. Like this ISO 10 oil, Superlube no longer manufactures and sells it, but the closest equivalent to that is going to be Singer sewing machine oil, which you can get for $4 or $5 for a 1 ounce bottle, maybe even 3 ounces. I can't remember off the top of my head, but you can get that at like Michael's or Hobby Lobby or whatever. And a lot of tournament casters use that stuff in their reels, but you're going to probably want to add a drop to it every few weeks or a month or so. And when you get to tailoring your reels to how you want them, you're going to develop a routine. And okay, I like this oil and these bearings, and I like this grease here. And you can really get something unique and in a way that the manufacturers just don't have the time or resources to dictate in order to put that across an entire product line. A fishing reel is a personal item. We use them. We appreciate their quality and craftsmanship, and it's up to us to put the finishing touches on them to make them truly ours, whether it's part swapping or using different lubricants like you see here. But on that note, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop me a comment down below. I'll try my best to answer them. Feel free to pick my brain. I'm always around. And again, thanks for watching.